The most dangerous truth is not written in any holy book. It is whispered between the cracks of human souls. The empath who refuses to set boundaries will one day look into the mirror and see the monster they have spent their entire life trying to avoid. Carl Jung saw it in the trembling voices of his patients. People who were born with hearts so open that the world poured into them without asking permission. They believed their empathy was light, divine, the proof of their goodness. But slowly, that light began to flicker, because empathy without edges is not light. It is fire without form. It burns the giver first. You see, when you feel everything, you lose the ability to feel yourself. What you pity begins to own you. What you refuse to resist begins to infect you. And the pain you absorb from others starts to ferment in your unconscious until it becomes something unrecognizable, a creature that speaks with your voice but carries the rage of every wound you never named. Imagine a woman who feels too deeply. Let us call her Anna. She walks into Jung's office with eyes heavy as oceans. Every emotion she has ever touched lives there. She apologizes before every sentence, afraid of taking up space. Her body is tense, her breath shallow, as if existing itself is an intrusion. She tells him she can feel what others feel, her mother's disappointment, her partner's rage, her colleague's anxiety. They live in her chest, humming like foreign music she cannot turn off. She calls it a gift, but her journal tells another story. At midnight she writes, "I can no longer tell where I end and they begin. I am dissolving. I am disappearing." This is not empathy. This is possession. Anna is the archetype of the boundaryless empath. Her compassion has no walls, no locks, no doors. Her psyche is a house where strangers enter freely, and every day they leave pieces of themselves behind. Her kindness has become a breach. Her shadow feeds on the invasion until one day it rises, not as tenderness, but as fury. She snaps at her partner, her words slicing like knives. When silence returns, shame floods her face. She whispers, "That was not me." But Jung would say otherwise. It was her. It was the shadow she has been hosting in secret, the monster born from every swallowed no, every unspoken resentment, every act of self-betrayal disguised as love. This is the paradox. The empath who flees the monster outside must eventually face the monster within. To live as a sponge is to drown in poison. To refuse boundaries is to invite possession. Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow. The moment when the self turns to face the darkness it created by trying too hard to be good. Boundaries, he said, are not cruelty. They are the architecture of the soul. They hold the river of empathy within its sacred banks. Without them, that river becomes a flood. Crops drown, homes are destroyed, lives are washed away. The empath without boundaries is that flood, uncontrollable, consuming, annihilating even the ones they meant to save. And so the lesson begins. To heal, you must betray the illusion that love means sacrifice. To save others, you must first save yourself from yourself. The world praises the empath, the one who feels, the one who listens, the one who forgives even when forgiveness is not asked for. Society calls it virtue, but Carl Jung warned that unguarded empathy is not holiness. It is hunger. It is the unconscious plea of a child who believes that if they carry everyone else's pain, maybe, just maybe, they will finally be loved. But here is the tragedy. What is repressed does not vanish. It transforms. When you exile your anger, it does not die. It hides. When you bury your resentment, it grows roots in the dark. When you silence your boundaries, they become teeth inside your shadow, waiting to bite the next person who comes too close. The empath who refuses to say no spends years whispering yes, until one day something inside them erupts, saying, "Enough." And that eruption is never gentle. Inside the mind of a boundaryless empath, the flood begins quietly. It begins with small betrayals, a forced smile, a swallowed truth, a night spent fixing someone else's storm while ignoring your own. You tell yourself it is love, but the body knows better. The shoulders tighten, the chest collapses, the gut twists. These are not random sensations. They are the alarms of the unconscious, warning that your empathy has turned into self-erasure. Soon, resentment seeps through the cracks. You find yourself giving, but secretly resenting those you give to. You begin to notice a quiet venom in your thoughts, a wish that someone, anyone, would finally notice how much you bleed for them. But they do not. How could they? You have taught them that your suffering is invisible, that your silence is normal, that your love has no cost. And then the flood arrives. It does not knock politely. It does not whisper. It crashes. The empath who once absorbed everything now explodes. They shout, they accuse, they manipulate, they weaponize guilt and call it care. They strangle others with their love that is really fear in disguise. And when the dust settles, they are left trembling in horror, whispering again, "That was not me." But it was. It was the monster born from years of drowning. It was the shadow of every abandoned boundary returning with interest. Jung called this psychic possession, when the repressed self, denied too long, storms the surface and seizes control. Empathy without limits becomes tyranny. Compassion without self-awareness becomes manipulation. Love without boundaries becomes bondage. The flood does not only destroy others, it drowns the empath themselves. Because every yes that betrayed your truth, every sorry that covered your pain, every "it's fine" that suffocated your voice, all of them became water in your basement. And one day, the door bursts open. Jung once wrote that the unconscious seeks balance, not comfort. If you silence your rage, it will force you to listen through chaos. If you deny your selfishness, it will possess you until you act in ways that horrify you. The psyche demands wholeness, and wholeness requires shadow. So what must the empath do? They must build edges. They must learn to say no as an act of love. They must guard their empathy like sacred fire, for fire without form burns down the house, but fire within a hearth warms it. And yet, this lesson feels like betrayal, because to an empath, boundaries feel cruel, saying no feels like murder, asserting themselves feels like abandonment. But this is the paradox. The refusal to be cruel in small ways leads to greater cruelty in the end. When you refuse to disappoint others, you destroy yourself. When you refuse to protect your own soul, you become the very thing you fear: the taker, the manipulator, the monster. So ask yourself, how much of your kindness is fear? How much of your empathy is the desperate hope that love will not leave you if you keep bleeding for it? The flood within is not a punishment. It is a revelation. It shows you what happens when love forgets to love itself. There comes a night when the empath stands before a mirror and no longer recognizes the reflection. The eyes are the same, but behind them something flickers, something sharp, hungry, and unfamiliar. It is not the gentle soul they once believed themselves to be. It is the shadow, staring back, waiting to be acknowledged. Carl Jung said that what you resist persists. The parts of yourself you exile do not disappear. They gather strength in the dark, and one day they return wearing your face. The mirror becomes the battlefield of the self. You can no longer tell whether the monster lives inside or outside of you. Imagine Anna again. Months after her first confession, she dreams of a house where every door is open. Strangers enter and leave at will. Some laugh, some weep, some scream. She tries to comfort them, to offer water, to clean the broken glass they leave behind. But soon they begin to destroy the house. They tear the curtains, break the furniture, steal her belongings. She pleads with them to stop, but her voice is swallowed by the chaos. And in that dream, something inside her snaps. She grabs a knife and begins to strike at the intruders. When she wakes, she is horrified. "I would never do that," she says. But the psyche knows better. The dream is not violence, it is revelation. Her unconscious is screaming, if you refuse to guard your own house, you will eventually burn it down yourself. The mirror is not an enemy, it is a teacher. It reflects not only who you are, but who you have abandoned. Every time you silence your anger, it hides behind your smile. Every time you suppress your truth, it crouches in the corner, sharpening its claws. Every time you say yes when your soul screams no, the monster grows stronger. Boundaries are not walls, they are mirrors with locks. They show you where you end and where others begin. They protect the sacred architecture of the self. Without them, empathy mutates into obsession. You begin to monitor every tone, every sigh, every silence. You mistake other people's emotions for your own. You call it sensitivity, but Jung called it identification with the other's complex. A psychic merging so total that you cease to exist as yourself. And when that happens, resentment begins to rot the roots of compassion. The empath who once gave freely begins to give out of duty, fear, or habit. They smile, they serve, but deep inside they whisper, "Why does no one notice me? Why does no one care for me?" The answer is painful, but simple. You trained them not to. You taught the world that your boundaries were optional. You built a mirror that reflected everyone but yourself. The monster in the mirror is not evil. It is the truth of what has been suppressed. It is your unmet anger, your unspoken needs, your denied self-respect. It has waited patiently for you to look it in the eye. And when you finally do, it will not destroy you, it will free you. Jung called this process individuation, the sacred reconciliation between light and dark, compassion and power, empathy and selfhood. To face the monster is to reclaim what was always yours, the right to exist fully. The empath's journey is not about becoming less kind. It is about becoming whole, because wholeness includes rage as much as love, strength as much as softness. The mirror will not lie to you. It will show the truth that the monster and the empath are not enemies. They are halves of the same soul, waiting to be integrated. So when you look into your own reflection and feel the unease rise, do not turn away. Do not cover it with affirmations or forced positivity. Stand there, breathe, whisper, "I see you." Because the moment you can face your monster without flinching, the mirror stops reflecting terror. It begins to reflect power. The empath who learns to hold their own gaze becomes untouchable. They no longer drown in others' pain. They no longer mistake self-erasure for love. They give without losing themselves. They love without leaking. And in that stillness, that calm, rooted presence, they finally understand the paradox. That to protect your empathy, you must dare to be seen as cruel. That to remain gentle, you must learn to be fierce. That to love purely, you must first learn to say no. Only then does the monster bow. Only then does the mirror reveal what it always wanted to show you, not a flood, not a wound, but a face that is whole. Once the mirror has been faced, the true initiation begins. The empath who dares to look inward soon discovers that the monster is not confined to one reflection, it multiplies. It lives in the faces of lovers, parents, friends, and strangers. It hides behind every demand, every guilt, every unspoken expectation. The world itself becomes a hall of mirrors. You walk through it, believing you are surrounded by narcissists, manipulators, and predators, and perhaps you are. But here is the secret Jung unveiled. Every reflection is also a fragment of you. The people who drain you carry the echoes of your own unclaimed hunger. The ones who use you mirror your own refusal to use your power. The ones who silence you reveal your own complicity in your silence. The empath without boundaries becomes trapped in this hall, chasing monsters in others, while the true one grows stronger within. You tell yourself you are healing them, saving them, fixing them, but each rescue becomes another projection. You pour yourself into their darkness, hoping to redeem them, and instead you dissolve further into shadow. It begins subtly. You start policing the emotions of others, watching their faces, anticipating storms before they arrive. You think you are being sensitive. In truth, you are surveilling. You are trying to control chaos through empathy. It feels noble, but it is possession disguised as love. You are no longer living your life. You are orbiting theirs, a psychic satellite tethered to their moods. And then comes the resentment. It blooms quietly, like mold on the walls of your soul. You give and give, but underneath each act of care, bitterness festers. You smile as you hand over your energy, your teammate, your body, but inside, a voice whispers, "Why do they never give back? Why does no one see me?" The answer, again, is cruel in its simplicity. You trained them not to. You told them that your needs were optional, your voice unnecessary, your presence guaranteed. You became invisible by choice, and now you mourn your own disappearance. Jung warned that what is repressed returns as fate. The empath represses their anger and meets it again as cruelty. They repress their selfishness and encounter it in those who exploit them. They repress their dominance and fall into the hands of the dominant. Life, guided by the unconscious, will keep presenting the same mirror until you dare to see what it reflects. And when you finally do, when you look around the hall and realize that every mirror holds a lesson, something extraordinary happens. The reflections begin to crack. The illusions that once terrified you start to dissolve. You see that the people who wounded you were not gods of cruelty, but mirrors of your own unhealed boundaries. In that moment, empathy transforms. It stops being a flood and becomes a lens. You no longer drown in what you see. You observe with clarity. You no longer take every emotion personally. You witness it without absorption. You no longer confuse compassion with compliance. You love fiercely but selectively, and the mirrors respond. The manipulators retreat. Their hooks cannot find a place to land. The takers lose interest. The flood has dried. The world reshapes itself around your newfound edges because the outer world mirrors the inner. When you integrate your shadow, the external shadows lose their power. But beware, the Hall of Mirrors has one final trick. It will tempt you with moral superiority. You will look at others still drowning and whisper to yourself, "I have evolved." But the moment you do, you step back into shadow, because judgment is just another mask of fear. The true empath does not rise above others. They simply stop leaking into them. They love without losing form. They walk among monsters and recognize each one as kin, not in affection, but in understanding. The Hall of Mirrors is not meant to punish you. It is meant to teach you that projection is mercy disguised as pain. Every reflection, no matter how distorted, is an invitation to return home to yourself. And when you finally stop running from the mirrors, when you touch the glass and whisper, "I see you, and I see me," the entire hall begins to collapse. The shards fall around you like rain, shimmering with 1,000 fractured lights. You stand at the center, untouched, whole. The monsters vanish, the noise fades, and for the first time in your life, silence feels safe. Because the mirrors are gone. There is only you, the empath, who no longer seeks to save the world, but to understand it. The empath who no longer runs from monsters, because they have befriended their own. When the mirrors have shattered and silence finally arrives, the real descent begins. The empath must now walk down the stairs into the basement of their own psyche, the place where the flood began, where the air smells of forgotten things, and where the walls breathe with the weight of everything unspoken. This is the territory Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious. It is not a poetic idea. It is a lived terror, because down there, waiting in the half-light, is the monster itself, not imagined, not metaphorical, real, made of every abandoned no, every swallowed cry, every act of self-erasure. It does not hide anymore. It waits. You descend slowly. Each step creaks with memory. You remember the nights you said yes when your soul begged you to stop, the relationships where you became invisible, the moments when you thought love meant self-sacrifice. The air thickens. The deeper you go, the more the rational mind trembles, because you know what comes next. At the far end of the basement, a figure moves. It is you, but not quite. The eyes burn with rage, the mouth twists in pain. This is the part of you that you exiled to remain kind, the one who wanted to scream but instead smiled, the one who wanted to fight but instead forgave, the one who wanted to live but instead served. You freeze. Every instinct screams to run, but this TMA, you do not. You take one more step, and another. The monster snarls, expecting your fear. Instead you whisper, "I know you." In that instant, something changes. The rage falters, the shadow wavers, the basement breathes. Because you have done what few ever dare, you have met yourself in the dark without turning away. Jung taught that the shadow is not evil, it is energy that has been orphaned. The monster is not your enemy, it is your abandoned strength. When you kneel before it and speak its name, it does not devour you, it dissolves. The darkness folds into you like ink into water, and for the first TMA, you feel whole. Outside, thunder rolls. Rain begins to fall, but it is not the destructive flood of before, it is cleansing rain. The storm that once drowned you now dances to your heartbeat. The lightning that once terrified you now illuminates the hidden corners of your being. You see paths you never dared to walk. You see doors you can finally lock. The basement begins to transform. The cracked walls glow faintly. The damp floor dries. You realize this place was never hell. It was a womb. Every shadow was waiting to be integrated. Every scream was waiting to be heard. The monster was never there to punish you. It was there to return your power. You stand up. The air feels lighter, your chest steady. You walk back up the stairs. The storm outside rages, but it no longer frightens you, because you understand now you are the storm. You are both thunder and calm. You are both flood and shore. And when you reach the top step, the house feels different. The rooms are quiet. The doors are closed, but not locked. There is order, not fear. You have boundaries now. The house has form. The river has banks. In the distance, lightning flashes once more, but it does not destroy. It reveals. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the moment when the unconscious is no longer a threat, but an ally. When the storm within becomes your teacher, not your tormentor, when you realize that integration was never about killing the monster, but about remembering that it was always part of your humanity. And so you breathe. The flood is over. The storm is now yours to command. After the storm subsides, something unfamiliar fills the air stillness. Not the fragile calm that comes before another collapse, but the solid quiet of a soul that finally knows its own borders. In this stillness, the empath learns the most difficult art of all, the sacred act of saying no. To the unhealed empath, that word once felt like violence. Every refusal carried guilt. Every limit sounded like betrayal. They believed kindness meant surrender, and that love required endless availability. But Jung would have smiled and said, "The word no is not a sword, it is a key. It locks the door that guards your essence. It keeps your fire from spilling into the void." At first, the sacred no trembles. When you speak it, your throat tightens, your heart races, your mind screams apologies. You imagine rejection waiting at the other end, but you speak it anyway, because you have seen what happens when you do not. You have seen the flood, you have felt the possession, you have met the monster, and you now understand that every boundary unspoken becomes an invitation for chaos to return. The sacred no is not anger, it is architecture. It builds invisible walls around the soul, not prisons, but walls that define shape. Inside those walls, empathy becomes pure again. It stops leaking into every wound around it. It flows where it is needed, not where it is demanded. Say no to what drains you. Say no to those who mistake your kindness for compliance. Say no to the ghosts who keep knocking from your past, asking for one more chance to feed. Say no to your own compulsion to rescue everyone but yourself. Each refusal is a small resurrection. Each no is another brick in the foundation of your rebirth. People will not like it. They will call you selfish. They will call you cold. They will say you have changed, and they will be right, because you are no longer willing to drown so that others may breathe. Their anger is not a sign that you have failed. It is proof that the spell has broken. As Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The sacred no will burn at first. It will tear through your old identity, the savior, the caretaker, the one who never needed anything. You will grieve that version of yourself. You will mourn the illusions that once made you feel worthy, but that grief is sacred too. It is the funeral of the false self. And then, something beautiful begins to happen. You start hearing your own voice again. You start feeling what is truly yours and what is not. The guilt fades, replaced by clarity. The anxiety dissolves, replaced by quiet strength. You realize that real compassion has edges, that love is not an open wound, but a steady flame held in cupped hands. Anna felt it the first time she whispered her no. Her partner had come home angry, his words sharp and heavy. The old Anna would have absorbed it all, taking the poison into her lungs, mistaking endurance for love. But this time, she breathed and said softly, "That is yours, not mine." For a moment, silence filled the room. He stared at her, confused, expecting her collapse. But she did not fall. She stood steady, calm, alive. The storm passed. The house remained. And in that silence, she realized what it meant to be free. Because the sacred no does not destroy connection. It reveals which connections were real. The ones built on control crumble. The ones built on respect deepen. The people who loved your compliance will leave. The people who love your wholeness will stay. And those who remain will meet a new kind of empath, not the sponge, but the vessel. This is the paradox. Every no you speak out of love becomes an invitation for truth to enter. You lose false peace and gain real harmony. You lose the illusion of being loved by everyone and gain the reality of being respected by a few. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity, and clarity is love's highest form. The sacred no is not the end of empathy, it is the rebirth of it. When the sacred no has been spoken enough times, it stops trembling. It becomes a steady note, vibrating through the body, calm, confident, immovable. It no longer needs explanation or apology, it simply exists, like breath. And in that soundless certainty, the empath transforms into something new, not the healer, not the martyr, not the victim, but the sovereign soul. Jung called it individuation, the state of becoming whole, where the light no longer fears the dark and the shadow no longer hides from the Sunday. You are no longer a collection of fragments, but an entire being. You have descended into the basement, faced the monster, survived the flood, and returned with the fire that once consumed you, now purified, now contained. The sovereign soul does not live to be good. They live to be real. They no longer confuse endless giving with love, or silence with peace. They understand that empathy without boundaries is not compassion, it is possession, and they refuse to be possessed again. To live as a sovereign soul is to walk through the world with open eyes and a guarded heart. You feel everything, but you are owned by nothing. You see pain in others and still know where you end and they begin. You offer help without disappearing. You love deeply without dissolving. There will still be storms, there will still be monsters, but they no longer terrify you because you recognize them. They are your reflections, not enemies, not curses, but teachers. When anger arises, you greet it. When envy whispers, you listen. When fear knocks, you open the door. Nothing needs to be exiled anymore. This is freedom, not the airy illusion of always feeling calm, but the grounded power of being able to face chaos without losing your shape. It is the difference between being a flood and being a river, between being a ghost and being a vessel. Anna felt it the day she looked in the mirror and saw her own eyes, steady and alive. The distortion was gone. The monster had not vanished. It had integrated. Its rage had become her strength. Its selfishness had become her self-respect. Its chaos had become her clarity. She was no longer afraid of her reflection. She smiled not because she was pure, but because she was whole. The world began to change around her. The takers drifted away, unable to feed on her anymore. The manipulators lost their power. Their words bounced off her boundaries like waves against stone. And in their place came people who could meet her fully equals, who respected her yes because they honored her no. This is the miracle of sovereignty. When you integrate your shadow, the outer shadows lose their power. The world mirrors your wholeness. You begin to attract relationships that do not demand sacrifice, work that does not drain you, joy that does not depend on someone else's suffering. You become the eye of the storm, calm, aware, radiant. And yet, the sovereign soul does not forget where they came from. They remember the years of drowning, the nights of guilt, the faces of those who mistook their silence for peace. They remember, but they do not return. Because empathy without edges is a poison they will never drink again. The sovereign soul loves differently now. Their love is not an open wound. It is a sacred fire, guarded but generous. It warms, it heals, it guides. It never burns the house down. So, when you feel the old habits stirring, the urge to fix, to please, to absorb, pause, breathe. Place your hand over your heart and whisper, I am not your storm, I am my own. The monster is no longer your master. It walks beside you now, silent and loyal, its once terrifying strength turned into protection. Together you move through life as one being, shadow and light, boundary and empathy, storm and calm. This is the final revelation Jung left for those brave enough to descend. The empath's destiny is not to be consumed. It is to awaken. It is to stand in the storm and not drown. It is to love with clarity, to give with choice, to exist without apology. And when you finally do, when you become the vessel rather than the flood, when you hold your own soul like sacred architecture, that is when the world changes shape around you. Because in truth, you were never meant to be the healer of others. You were meant to be the guardian of your own fire. That is sovereignty. That is wholeness. That is freedom. When the soul has reclaimed its fire and the storm has settled, the journey bends toward its quiet conclusion. Not an ending, but a return. Integration is not about ascending to light and abandoning darkness. It is about walking through both with equal grace. It is about knowing that the shadow was never the enemy but the map. Every pain you endured was guiding you home. Carl Jung called this the return to the self. It is the stage after the descent, when the fragmented psyche no longer fights itself. The empath who once drowned in others now breathes in their own rhythm. The one who used to absorb pain now transforms it. The one who feared boundaries now builds them like temples, strong, sacred, alive. You begin to notice the subtle differences in your days. The silence that once felt heavy now feels clean. The solitude that once burned with loneliness now glows with peace. The emotions that once terrified you, anger, jealousy, grief, now arrive as teachers, each carrying a lantern. You listen to them without being possessed. You thank them, then let them leave. This is not perfection. It is humanity fully lived. Integration does not erase struggle. It gives meaning to it. The empath who has become whole moves differently through the world. Their steps are slower, deliberate. They no longer rush to fill the silence, nor to save every sinking ship. They have learned that some storms must be faced alone. They understand that their compassion is not infinite, it is precious. It must be guarded like water in a desert. You will feel this transformation in small moments. The pause before you answer. The calm when someone projects their pain onto you. The unshakable awareness that their storm is not your weather. These are the signs that you have returned to yourself. And yet, integration also carries responsibility. Once you have walked through your own darkness, you can no longer look at the pain of others with judgment. You recognize the monsters in their eyes as echoes of your own. You see their cruelty not as evil, but as blindness. You understand that compassion is not pity. It is presence without losing form. So when you meet those still drowning, the ones still mistaking empathy for love, still collapsing beneath the weight of every emotion, you do not rush to rescue them. You offer light, not salvation. You tell them gently, you do not need to be everything for everyone. You only need to be whole. This is how healing multiplies, not through saving, but through embodiment. The sovereign soul becomes a quiet mirror where others can finally see themselves clearly. And one day, when you look back, you will realize that the monster you feared was the gatekeeper of your power. It guarded the fire until you were brave enough to claim it. It tested your resolve until you learned that strength and softness can coexist. It was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to wake you up. Now, when you stand in the mirror, you no longer see duality. You see depth. The face staring back at you is neither angel nor demon. It is simply human, flawed, radiant, alive. You smile, not because you are healed, but because you are real. The basement is no longer dark. The storm has become rain that feeds your garden. The house of your psyche stands strong, its doors open, its locks firm, its windows clear. You have become the guardian of your own fire, not a flood, not a victim, but a vessel of light contained by sacred boundaries. This is the final paradox. You cannot become light until you have befriended your darkness. You cannot truly love until you have learned to say no. You cannot heal others until you have reclaimed yourself. And now, you walk forward not as the empath who drowned, but as the soul who learned to breathe underwater. You have faced the storm, touched the monster, shattered the mirrors, spoken the sacred no, and returned with the truth written in your bones. Empathy without boundaries is possession. Empathy with boundaries is power. And so, you step into the light not to escape the dark, but to carry it with you, balanced, whole, awake. The journey ends where it began, in the heart of the empath who finally remembered that love is not the act of dissolving, but the art of remaining.